I didn't see it coming. My wife, Laura, had always been sharp and ambitious, and her job at Axis Tech seemed to be going places. When she started pulling late nights, I chalked it up to the usual corporate grind. After all, working with the CEO himself on a high-stakes merger wasn't the kind of opportunity anyone in their right mind would squander. But there was something different about her. She wasn't just busy, she was distant. Distant in a way that made me feel like I was the neighbor and not the man she vowed to spend her life with. Still, I didn't pry. I wanted to believe it was just stress. And then, last Thursday, she came home, her face pale and her hands trembling, and dropped a bombshell on me. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I went to dinner with Roger, the CEO. It wasn't just business." The words hit me like a freight train. "What does that mean, Laura?" I demanded, the air in the room growing thick. Her lips tightened. "It means exactly what you think it does. He likes me more than he should. And I need to warn you, stay out of this, Dave. Roger isn't just any man. He'll destroy you if you try to interfere." The mix of fear and guilt in her eyes did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside me. "You went on a date with him?" I spat out. "And now you're telling me to sit back and do nothing? What the hell kind of person do you think I am?" Her response chilled me. "The kind of person who wants to live a long life. This isn't something you can win, Dave." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of betrayal, rage, and humiliation. I had sacrificed so much for Laura, and this was how she repaid me. With thinly veiled threats wrapped in faux concern. 2 days later, Roger was in the headlines. A single-car accident on the turnpike had landed him in the ICU. Some said he'd fallen asleep at the wheel after another late-night business dinner, others whispered about foul play. When Laura found out, she lost it. "You didn't, Dave, tell me you didn't do anything," she demanded, her face flushed with anger. Her reaction was almost comical. I didn't lay a finger on Roger. But her paranoia made me wonder if she believed I was capable of it. I didn't correct her. What if I did? I shot back, my voice dripping with venom. What if I'm not the pushover you've taken me for? Her expression hardened, a mix of fear and disbelief. If you did, you've just made this worse. You don't know who you're dealing with. And neither do you, I countered. That conversation was the turning point. I realized I had been too passive, too accommodating. It was time to turn the tables, to take control of the narrative Laura thought she was writing. But I wouldn't be reckless. If she underestimated me, that was my advantage. I spent the next day making calls, reconnecting with people from my past life, the ones who owed me favors from my years as an insurance investigator. If Roger was untouchable in his ivory tower, I'd find a way to climb it or tear it down brick by brick. That night, while Laura was out, checking on a friend, I dug into her laptop. What I found confirmed my worst fears, dozens of emails between her and Roger, each one more damning than the last. They weren't just inappropriate, they were a manifesto of deceit, outlining meetings, secret getaways, and plans that didn't include me. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I printed everything, stashing the documents in a secure place. Knowledge was power, and I wasn't about to tip my hand. By the time Laura got home, she was met with the version of me she thought she knew, quiet, introspective, and utterly unaware. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. I nodded. "Yeah, just thinking about us. I'm trying to figure out where we went wrong." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I almost believed she still cared. Almost. "Dave, I want to make this right," she said. "But you have to trust me." "Oh, I trust you," I replied, forcing a smile. "I just think we need a fresh start." Little did she know, the storm was just beginning. I wasn't the same man she'd taken for granted all these years, and by the time this was over, she'd realized that in the most unforgettable way. Laura thought she was in control. That was her first mistake. The second was underestimating what I'd do once pushed to the edge. My mind was no longer clouded with grief or confusion, it was razor-sharp, fueled by betrayal and a simmering fury that refused to be contained. I spent the weekend piecing together everything I could about Roger Stone, the man who thought he could walk into my life and take whatever he wanted. Laura might have warned me to steer clear, but I wasn't afraid of him. I'd faced worse than corporate predators in my line of work. The emails I'd found on Laura's laptop painted a picture of a relationship that had grown dangerously intimate over the past few months. Their messages ranged from subtle flirtation to blatant innuendo, but one thread caught my attention. "Roger, you've been the brightest part of my life lately. Don't let him hold you back. You're meant for more. Laura, he's a good man, but I need something different. Roger, I'll give you the world if you let me." There it was, in black and white. She wasn't just toying with him, she was letting him think he could take my place. And that couldn't go unanswered. Sunday night, I visited an old friend, Marcus. He ran a private security firm now, but back in the day, he'd been the best PI I'd ever worked with. When I laid out what I'd discovered, he didn't need convincing. "You're playing with fire, Dave," he said, lighting a cigarette and leaning back in his chair. "Roger's not just some suit with a big paycheck. The man's got connections. And I've got nothing to lose," I replied. "Can you help me or not?" He exhaled a plume of smoke, grinning. "Oh, I'm in. But this isn't gonna be cheap." I didn't care about the cost. Marcus was the kind of guy who could find skeletons in a graveyard. If Roger had even a hint of dirt on him, Marcus would dig it up. While Marcus worked his magic, I focused on Laura. I started small, watching her closely, noting every inconsistency, every little lie. She claimed she was going to yoga Tuesday night, but her mat never left the closet. When I casually asked about her class, she said it had been cancelled. Another lie, another crack in her facade. By Wednesday, Marcus called with his first update. "Your guy's not as squeaky clean as he looks." His car accident? It wasn't just an accident. "What do you mean?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. "Let's just say Roger has enemies. The police found traces of tampering on his brakes, but they're keeping it quiet while they investigate." A chill ran down my spine. This was bigger than I thought. "Do you know who's behind it?" "Not yet. But I'm working on it." That night, Laura came home late, her face flushed. She tried to hide it, but I noticed the slight smell of cologne clinging to her clothes, one that wasn't mine. My fists clenched as she walked past me to the bedroom without a word. The next morning, I casually mentioned that I'd be working late and left the house. Instead of heading to the shop, I drove to Roger's office building. If she was spending her evenings with him, I needed to see it for myself. Parking across the street, I watched the glass doors like a hawk. Sure enough, around 6:30 p.m., Laura strolled out, her laughter echoing through the sidewalk as Roger walked beside her. He wasn't the imposing figure I'd imagined, just a middle-aged man with a receding hairline and a tailored suit. But his smug grin as he touched Laura's arm sent a surge of rage through me. They got into his car, a sleek black Mercedes, and drove off. I followed at a safe distance, my hands gripping the wheel so hard I thought it might snap. Their destination? A high-end restaurant downtown. From my vantage point across the street, I watched them share a bottle of wine and lean in close, their conversation animated. It wasn't just business, this was personal. I snapped pictures, my phone clicking softly as I documented every damning moment. By the time they left, I had enough evidence to destroy both their reputations if it came to that. When Laura came home that night, I was waiting in the living room, her laptop open on the coffee table. She froze when she saw me, her eyes darting to the screen. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Just catching up on some reading," I said, scrolling through the emails. "Seems like you've been busy." Her face went pale. "Dave, I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can," I said, standing up. "But I don't think I'm the one you should be explaining to." I held up my phone, showing her the pictures of her and Roger at the restaurant. Her jaw dropped, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "You followed me," she whispered. "I'm not the one who broke our vows, Laura. You did. And now, I think it's time we have a little chat about what happens next." Laura stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't decide whether to explain herself or run. The pictures on my phone told the story clearly enough. No amount of spinning would erase the image of her hand resting on Roger's arm, the way her lips curved into a smile reserved for someone she thought mattered more than me. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked, her voice cracking. I gave her a bitter smile. "Oh, Laura, I'm not going to do anything. You already did it." I leaned forward, savoring the fear flickering in her eyes. "But let me make one thing clear, I'm not the kind of man who lets things go." Her face hardened, the fear giving way to indignation. "Roger was right," she said, her voice low. "You're small. You'd rather destroy me than admit you're not enough." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "And you're such a victim, right? You cheat on me with your boss, warn me to stay out of it, and now you're upset because I'm not bowing out gracefully? Spare me, Laura. You're not worth the pity." Her cheeks flushed crimson, and for a moment, I thought she'd slap me. But instead, she stormed upstairs, slamming the door to the bedroom. I let her go. She thought she was retreating to safety, but her sanctuary was a cage, and I held the keys. The next day, I met Marcus at a dive bar just outside town. He slid into the booth opposite me, a manila envelope in hand. "You're going to love this," he said, grinning like a cat with a mouse in its jaws. Inside the envelope was a dossier on Roger Stone. It was a treasure trove of information, offshore accounts, dubious dealings, and a tangled web of favors that kept his skeletons buried. Most importantly, there was a series of payments made to an anonymous fixer who specialized in discrete problem solving. "Looks like your buddy Roger's got some dirty hands," Marcus said, sipping his beer. "The brake tampering? I'd bet my left arm this fixer had something to do with it. And guess what? The police are sniffing around, but they don't have enough to make a case." "What about leverage?" I asked, thumbing through the documents. Marcus tapped a finger on a highlighted section. "There's a shell company under his name. It's tied to a couple of political campaigns, funneling funds in ways that definitely violate election laws. If someone were to leak this..." A smile crept across my face. "Roger would be finished." "Exactly. But you'll want to be careful. A guy like him doesn't go down without a fight." I nodded, my mind already spinning with possibilities. Over the next few days, I laid the groundwork. First, I called in a favor from an old acquaintance who worked at a local paper. I fed them enough details to pique their interest, Roger's questionable finances, the rumors about the accident, and promised them an exclusive if they kept digging. Meanwhile, I kept Laura in the dark. She'd been avoiding me since our confrontation, which suited me just fine. At night, I slept on the couch, not because I was banished, but because I wanted her to feel the isolation she'd forced upon our marriage. Her routine became predictable. She left for work early, stayed late, and avoided eye contact whenever we crossed paths. She thought she was saving face, but I could see the cracks forming in her carefully curated facade. By Friday, the story broke. AxisTech CEO under scrutiny for financial misconduct, read the headline splashed across the front page of the Langston Herald. The article didn't name sources, but it detailed enough to put Roger in a very uncomfortable spotlight. When Laura came home that evening, she looked like a ghost. "Did you see the paper?" she asked, clutching the edge of the kitchen counter. I shrugged. "Caught a glimpse." Her eyes narrowed. "Did you have anything to do with this? Would it matter if I did?" She started to speak, then stopped, realizing the futility of arguing with someone who already knew too much. Instead, she grabbed her phone and retreated to the bedroom. I followed her quietly and stood outside the door, listening. "Roger, it's Laura," she whispered. "We need to talk. This article. I don't know how it got out, but it's bad. What do we do?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and I couldn't help but smile. The following week was chaos. Roger tried to dismiss the allegations as baseless, but his enemies smelled blood in the water. Laura, once the picture of confidence, was unraveling. She stopped going to work altogether, claiming she was sick. One evening, she cornered me in the living room. "I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, Dave, but you need to stop," she said, her voice trembling. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "Stop what? You're the one who made your bed, Laura. Now you get to lie in it." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If Roger goes down, he'll take me with him." "Then I guess you'd better hope he's good at damage control," I said, standing and walking past her. "Because this is just the beginning." The cracks in Laura's armor were growing deeper by the day. She spent her mornings pacing the kitchen, her phone glued to her ear, alternating between whispered pleas and tense arguments. Her evenings were even worse. Half-empty wine glasses littered the counter, and she'd stare out the window, her shoulders hunched like someone expecting an ambush. But I didn't let up. This was a game of endurance, and I had every intention of seeing it through to the bitter end. On Monday, Marcus called with an update. "You'll like this, Dave. I got a name on Roger's fixer, Trevor Haynes. Guy's got a reputation for making messy problems disappear. And guess what? He's been paid a retainer through one of Roger's accounts for the past 6 months. Any chance we can use that to pressure him?" I asked. Marcus chuckled. "Already ahead of you. I've got someone shadowing Trevor. If he so much as sneezes, we'll know about it." That was exactly what I needed. Trevor wasn't just a loose end, he was a fuse, and I was ready to light it. Meanwhile, I reached out to another old friend, Carla, who worked as a corporate compliance officer. She had the skills and access to help me dig into AXISTEC's internal dealings. Over drinks one evening, I laid out what I knew. "This is messy, Dave," she said, flipping through the documents I'd collected. "Roger's not just bending rules, he's outright snapping them in half. If you leak the right details, the board will drop him faster than a hot pan." "Good," I said, grinning. "Let's make sure they get the right details." The next bombshell hit on Wednesday, an exposé revealing Trevor Haynes's connection to the brake tampering. The story stopped short of tying it directly to Roger, but it didn't matter. The media was already circling like vultures. Laura read the article at the breakfast table, her face pale and drawn. "This can't be happening," she muttered, her hands trembling as she set the newspaper down. "Looks like Roger's got some skeletons in his closet," I said, sipping my coffee. She glared at me. "You think this is funny? My career, my life, is tied to him. If he falls, so do I." I set my mug down and leaned forward. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you climbed into bed with him, literally and figuratively." Her face twisted with a mix of anger and desperation. "You're trying to ruin me." "No, Laura," I said, standing and walking toward the door. "You ruined yourself. I'm just making sure the world knows it." On Friday night, I got a call from Carla. "Dave, we've got a problem," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "What is it?" "Roger knows someone's feeding the media. He's hired Trevor to trace the leaks, and if he finds out it's you," she didn't finish the sentence. My stomach tightened. "Let him come," I said, masking my nerves with bravado. "I've got nothing to hide. But I did have something to protect, my plan. If Trevor sniffed out my involvement, everything I'd worked for would crumble." That evening, Laura confronted me again, this time with a wild look in her eyes. "Roger wants to meet," she said, her voice trembling. "Good for him," I replied, not looking up from my book. "Don't be flippant," she snapped. "He's furious, Dave. He thinks you're behind the leaks, and he's not going to let this slide." I laughed, a low, humorless sound. "What's he going to do, Laura? File a lawsuit? Send his fixer after me? I've dealt with men like him before, they're all bark until someone bites back." Her lip quivered, and for a moment, I saw the woman I'd married, the one who used to believe in us. "Please," she whispered. "If you have anything to do with this, stop it. I'm begging you." I set my book down and stood, towering over her. "You made your choices, Laura. Now live with them." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. The next morning, Marcus called with the news I'd been waiting for. "We've got Trevor," he said, his tone triumphant. "Caught him meeting with Roger at a private club. Got pictures, audio, the whole 9 yards. They were discussing how to neutralize you." I grinned. "Perfect. Send everything to my contact at the Herald." By noon, the story was live, AccessTech CEO linked to corporate sabotage and intimidation tactics. The article painted Roger as a ruthless operator who'd stop at nothing to protect his empire. That evening, Laura sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "It's over," she said quietly. "What's over?" "Everything." She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Roger called me today. He's stepping down. The board's forcing him out. And they're investigating me too, Dave. They think I helped him cover things up." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "And did you?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Does it matter? My career's dead either way." For the first time in weeks, I felt a pang of pity. But it wasn't enough to stop what came next. "Then maybe," I said slowly, "you should have thought twice before destroying what we had." Her sobs filled the room as I turned and walked away, knowing the real blow was yet to come. I thought I had Laura and Roger right where I wanted them. The weight of their sins was dragging them down, and I was steering the narrative that would destroy everything they had built together. But I wasn't ready for what came next. It started with an unexpected call from Marcus. "Dave, you sitting down?" he asked, his voice unusually serious. "No. What's going on?" "There's been a development," he said, pausing. "It's about Laura. She's not just a pawn in Roger's game. She's been playing him too." "What the hell are you talking about?" I snapped, the air around me suddenly colder. "Roger wasn't chasing her," Marcus said slowly. "It was the other way around. She's the one who initiated the whole thing." I sank into the nearest chair, my mind reeling. That doesn't make sense. Why would she do that? She's been positioning herself to take over once Roger was out. All those late nights, the cozy dinners. It was her building alliances. And you won't believe the kicker, she's been talking to Trevor, too. She wanted him to keep tabs on you, make sure you didn't interfere. My world tilted. The betrayal I thought I'd been avenging suddenly felt deeper, more calculated. Laura hadn't just chosen Roger over me, she'd been playing both sides. For hours, I sat in my office, staring at the evidence Marcus had sent over. Emails, phone calls, and payments Laura had funneled to Trevor, all under the guise of consulting fees. I thought I knew what I was doing, teaching her and Roger a lesson. But now, the game had changed. Laura wasn't a victim or even an accomplice, she was the mastermind behind it all. By the time she came home that night, I was ready. She walked through the door, her face pale and drawn. "I'm done," she said softly. "Roger's gone, the board is breathing down my neck, and Trevor's disappeared. I've got nothing left." "Oh, I wouldn't say that," I replied, my voice cold. Her head snapped up, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear? Guilt? It didn't matter. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. I stood and walked toward her, holding up the latest dossier. "I know everything, Laura. How you played Roger, how you paid Trevor to spy on me. You didn't just cheat, you plotted. You schemed. You betrayed me in ways I didn't think were possible." Her face went white. "Dave, it's not what you think. Don't." I roared, slamming the papers onto the table. "Don't insult me with lies. Not after everything you've done." Tears filled her eyes, but I felt nothing. "I only did it because I was scared," she whispered. "Roger was too powerful, and I didn't know what else to do. I was trying to protect us." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Protect us? You destroyed us. And now you're going to pay for it." By the next morning, I was already in motion. Marcus and I compiled everything we had on Laura and Roger, the affair, the financial misconduct, and her role in manipulating both me and the board. I leaked it to the Herald, ensuring that the story would hit the press by Monday morning. Laura spent the weekend holed up in the bedroom, barely eating or speaking. I didn't bother checking on her. Let her stew in the mess she'd created. When the article went live, the fallout was immediate. Axis Tech issued a statement cutting ties with both Roger and Laura, citing violations of ethical standards. By the end of the day, Laura's professional reputation was in shambles, and Roger's once glorious career was officially over. Monday night, as I was savoring the victory, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find none other than Trevor Haynes standing on my porch, his expression unreadable. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. "What do you want?" Trevor sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped tightly. "You've done a number on Roger and Laura, but you're not as untouchable as you think. Is that a threat?" I asked, my voice low and steady. He shook his head. "A warning. You think you've won, but Laura's not finished. She's been making calls, trying to pin everything on you. If she goes down, she's taking you with her." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Let her try. I've got nothing to hide." Trevor smirked, pulling a small recorder from his pocket. "You sure about that?" When he hit play, my blood ran cold. The recording was from a conversation I'd had with Marcus, one where we discussed our plans to leak Roger's secrets. It wasn't outright damning, but in the wrong hands, it could raise questions about how far I'd gone to destroy their lives. "Where did you get this?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let's just say I have my ways," Trevor said, standing and pocketing the device. "I'm not your enemy, Dave. But you've made a mess, and if you're not careful, it's going to blow back on you." He walked to the door, pausing to glance back at me. "Think about what you really want. Revenge is sweet, but it's also messy. And you're neck deep in it." As the door closed behind him, I sat in silence, my mind racing. For the first time since this began, I realized I wasn't just fighting Laura and Roger, I was fighting the version of myself that I'd let this betrayal create. Trevor's visit left me rattled. For weeks, I had controlled the game, pushing Laura and Roger into a corner they couldn't escape. But now, the hunter felt like the hunted. I replayed Trevor's words in my mind over and over. You're not as untouchable as you think. That damn recording. It wasn't just a threat, it was leverage. And in the wrong hands, it could unravel everything I'd done. By Tuesday, my nerves were fraying. Laura hadn't left the house since the article dropped, and the tension between us had turned suffocating. She skulked around in silence, her phone constantly in hand, her face pale and drawn. I knew she was planning something, and I was determined to find out what. That night, I waited until she fell asleep and crept into the bedroom. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, and I carefully unplugged it, taking it into the hallway. A quick glance revealed she'd been texting someone frequently, Trevor. The messages were brief but telling. Laura, you have the recording. Use it. Trevor, not yet. Let me handle this my way. Laura, you promised me protection. He's dangerous. My stomach churned. She wasn't just scared, she was painting me as the villain. I scrolled further, uncovering an even more damning revelation, a message to Roger from days earlier. Laura, I told you we should have acted sooner. Dave is out of control. Fix this. Fix this. What did that mean? My heart pounded as I put the phone back and retreated to my office. If Laura and Trevor were conspiring, I needed to stay ahead of them. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected phone call, from Marcus. Got some news for you, he said. Trevor's been busy. He met with someone last night, Roger. The blood drained from my face. What? Yeah. They met at some dive bar on the outskirts of town. I've got pictures to prove it. He sent the photos while we were still on the call. There they were, sitting in a dimly lit corner booth, heads bowed in deep conversation. You think they're plotting against me? I asked, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Wouldn't rule it out, Marcus said. But here's the kicker, Roger doesn't look good. Word is he's desperate to clear his name, and Trevor's his last lifeline. They might be turning on Laura to save themselves. That gave me pause. If Roger and Trevor were selling Laura out, it could give me the opening I needed to end this once and for all. That evening, I finally confronted Laura. She was sitting in the living room, nursing a glass of wine and staring blankly at the TV. We need to talk, I said, my tone cold. She looked up, her expression wary. What now, Dave? I know you've been talking to Trevor. And I know about your little messages to Roger. Her face hardened, but there was a flicker of panic in her eyes. You've been spying on me? Don't play the victim, Laura. Not after everything you've done. She set the glass down and stood, her hands trembling. You don't understand. Trevor has dirt on you, Dave. If you keep pushing, he'll destroy you. Let him try, I said, stepping closer. But what about you? Do you really think Trevor or Roger will stick their necks out for you when the heat's on them? Her jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I do, I said, pulling out my phone. I've got pictures of Roger and Trevor meeting last night. You're not their ally, Laura. You're their scapegoat. Her breath hitched, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. You're lying. I tossed the phone onto the coffee table, the photos displayed on the screen. She stared at them, her hands covering her mouth. What do you want from me? She whispered. Everything, I said, my voice steady. The truth, the full story, and then you're going to help me bury Roger and Trevor before they bury you. Reluctantly, Laura started talking. She admitted to initiating the affair with Roger, hoping to climb the corporate ladder, but it quickly spiraled out of control. Roger's paranoia and Trevor's involvement made her feel trapped, and when I started fighting back, she panicked. Trevor told me you were dangerous, she said. He said you'd do anything to take me down. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. You don't get it, Laura. I wasn't taking you down, I was exposing the truth. But you made it worse by trying to outplay me. She flinched, and for a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. What now? She asked. Now, I said, leaning forward, you're going to record a statement. You'll spill everything, Roger's crimes, Trevor's role, and your part in it. And if you even think about double-crossing me, I'll make sure you regret it. Her shoulders sagged in defeat. Fine. I'll do it. By the next morning, I had Laura's confession in hand. It was raw, unpolished, but damning enough to take to the police and the media. Marcus helped me package it with the rest of the evidence, creating an airtight case against Roger and Trevor. But I wasn't finished yet. I had one more move to make, a twist that would ensure neither Laura nor her co-conspirators would ever recover. By the time Friday rolled around, the board was set, and the pieces were moving exactly where I wanted them. Laura had folded, Roger was cornered, and Trevor's loyalty to anyone but himself was non-existent. The chaos I had orchestrated was closing in on them all, but I wasn't finished. Not yet. First thing in the morning, I sent Laura's confession, along with every damning piece of evidence I had on Roger and Trevor, to the authorities. I made sure the Langston Herald got a copy as well. The wheels of justice were about to start turning, but I had one final move to play before it was out of my hands. That afternoon, I arranged a meeting with Roger. A simple text was all it took. We need to talk. I know everything. He didn't reply immediately, but when he did, it was curt. Meet me at the old Langston Quarry. 6 p.m. It was a fitting location. Quiet, isolated, and just ominous enough to suit a man like him. When I arrived, Roger was waiting, leaning against his sleek black Mercedes. He looked worse than the polished executive I'd seen weeks ago, his tie was loose, his face pale, and his eyes darted nervously as I approached. Dave, he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Let's be civil, shall we? I stopped a few feet away, crossing my arms. Civil? Like when you pursued my wife? Like when you tried to frame me for your mess? Tell me, Roger, how's that working out for you? His jaw tightened, and the fake smile vanished. What do you want? I want you to step down completely, I said, my voice cold. No more power plays, no more scheming. You disappear, or I make sure the world knows every dirty secret you've ever tried to hide. His laugh was bitter. You think you're in control? Trevor's got enough on you to burn you alive. And Laura, she'll drag you down with her if she has to. Trevor's finished, I said, smirking. He doesn't realize it yet, but he's a sinking ship. And Laura? She's already confessed. I've got her full statement, along with enough evidence to bury you both. For the first time, I saw panic flash across Roger's face. He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. And just so we're clear, I said, pulling out my phone, I've sent everything to the authorities. You're out of moves, Roger. The only question is whether you go quietly or make this harder on yourself. The next few days played out like a well-rehearsed symphony. On Saturday morning, the headlines screamed. Axis Tech CEO arrested in corruption scandal. Roger was taken into custody, his ties to corporate sabotage and financial misconduct laid bare for all to see. Trevor wasn't far behind. Marcus made sure the authorities had every scrap of evidence tying him to the brake tampering and Roger's attempts at intimidation. And Laura? She lost everything. Her career, her reputation, and whatever tenuous grip she had left on control slipped away. The board at Axis Tech cut her loose, and with Roger's arrest, her name was forever linked to the scandal. She spent most of the week locked in the guest room, refusing to speak to me. When she finally emerged, her face was a hollow mask. You got what you wanted, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I hope it was worth it. I stared at her, the woman I had once loved, and felt nothing. You made your choices, Laura. Now you get to live with them. I thought it was over, but life had one last card to play. A week after Roger's arrest, I received an anonymous package at my door. Inside was a single USB drive. Curious, I plugged it into my laptop, and what I found made my blood run cold. It was footage, grainy but clear enough, of a meeting between Trevor and Marcus. You sure he won't trace this back to me? Trevor asked, his voice low. Don't worry, Marcus replied. Dave thinks I'm on his side. He's too blinded by revenge to see what's right in front of him. My stomach twisted as the realization hit me. Marcus had been playing me from the start. The help he provided, the evidence he uncovered, it wasn't about justice or loyalty. It was about using me as a pawn to take down Roger and Trevor while keeping his own hands clean. I sank into my chair, the weight of betrayal crashing over me. I had thought I was the mastermind, the one pulling the strings. But in the end, I was just another piece on the board. I cut ties with Marcus immediately, vowing never to let anyone manipulate me like that again. As for Laura, I filed for divorce the following week. She didn't fight it. By then, we were both too broken to pretend there was anything left to save. In the months that followed, life moved on. Roger's trial dominated the headlines, Trevor vanished without a trace, and Laura disappeared from my life as quietly as she had entered it. And me? I rebuilt. Slowly, piece by piece, I started over, wiser and more cautious than before. But sometimes, late at night, I'd think about that final twist, the moment I realized I wasn't as in control as I thought. And I'd wonder, had I won, or had I simply survived?